Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we are strapping on our senatorial sandals and diving into the most cutthroat, high-stakes part of Imperial Rome. But we are not going to the battlefield or the Senate floor. We are going straight to the ledger, specifically the books of the Emperor Vespasian.
That's right. We are talking about the massive financial undertaking required to rebuild Rome after the chaos of the Year of Four Emperors. Vespasian needed serious cash to stabilize the state and fund these huge projects, most famously the Flavian Amphitheater, or, what we now know as the Colosseum. And to raise this money, he kicked off a really rigorous and deeply unpopular census.
And our deep dive today reveals how this intense financial audit led one sharp, highly cynical Roman informer, Marcus Didius Falco, right into the surprisingly ruthless, politically connected and, well, deadly world of the arena bosses, the Leonidas. This is where wealth and spectacle met actual murder.
And the sources we have, they're incredible. They give us this intricate, almost episodic narrative detailing Falco's unique mission. It started strictly as a tax investigation, just looking at wealthy men who were, deliberately fiddling their enormous returns.
So just a regular tax audit then?
Well, it started that way, but the focus quickly narrowed to conducting what they called lifestyle checks on those profiting most obscenely from the public games. And it zeroes in pretty fast on two immensely powerful Tripolitanian rivals, a guy named Calliopas and another named Saturninus.
Our mission today is to unpack this incredibly complex set of source materials. We want to show you exactly how a simple censor's audit spirals violently into international rivalry, sophisticated political sabotage, and eventually shocking murders and corruption at the highest levels of Roman patronage.
And it all centers around one question.
Who controls the spectacle of death in Rome?
Exactly. We're going deep backstage to see the grim economic reality behind the blood sport. We want to see how those colossal fortunes were truly being made, and more importantly, how they were being hidden from the state.
And it's vital to note this is not just about tax evasion, is it?
No, not at all. This is about imperial oversight of a booming, violent sector that was, by its very nature, almost impossible to control. We're going to track the money, the motives, and the bodies all the way across the Mediterranean to expose the real cost of public spectacle.
Okay, so to truly grasp why a tax audit would put a man's life in danger and eventually involve, lions and state-sponsored murder, we have to start with the political landscape. This is Rome under Vespasian. He was the great stabilizer, the man who brought order back, but his finances were always precarious, especially with the cost of building the Colosseum just looming over everything.
Absolutely. Vespasian was determined to maintain his reputation as the straight shooter, the moral center after the degeneracy of the Julio-Claudians. But running an empire requires money and loyalty, and sometimes those things necessitate a bit of realpolitik, making deals you don't exactly talk about on the Senate floor.
And this is where this highly influential figure, Antonia Caenis, comes into play. She is the definitive power behind the throne, operating entirely outside the official political structure. Tell us a bit about her. Her background is pretty impressive.
It is. Caenis was Vespasian's longtime mistress, and this was not a quick fling. Their relationship began when she was a freedwoman who had worked previously for Claudius's mother, Antonia Minor. That gave Caenis immense connections and a really deep understanding of the inner workings of the old imperial household.
So when Vespasian became emperor, everyone expected him to drop her, right? That was the custom. You needed a politically suitable wife.
Right. But he didn't. He broke with tradition, taking her right along to the palace with him. And that move alone demonstrated her grand status. It signaled to the entire elite class that she possessed immense, albeit completely unofficial, power. It was a calculated risk, but a political masterstroke, really.
A masterstroke how? Because it allowed him to keep his hands clean.
Precisely. It was brilliant because it allowed Vespasian to remain pristine. He could appear, as the sources suggest, too straight to permit backstage machinations. He could sincerely tell the Senate that he was above the petty corruption of lobbying and all those backroom deals. Meanwhile, Caenis was handling every kind of shady transaction you can imagine, keeping the emperor's reputation spotless while maximizing imperial income.
So she was the state's outsourced, ethically flexible chief operating officer for fundraising. Is that a fair way to put it?
That's a perfect way to put it. The popular and seemingly well-founded suspicion was that the highest administrative and political posts, tribuneships, priesthoods, even military assignments could be allocated at her word. Not to mention pardons, fixed court decisions, lucrative state contracts.
All in return for a substantial payment, I assume.
Of course. Yeah. And that payment was often funneled directly or indirectly back into the imperial treasury or, into her own very, very deep pockets.
That system sounds incredibly cynical. It enriched and empowered Canis, obviously, giving her a massive private fortune. But you mentioned it also secured Vespasian, a legion of grateful friends. How did that work?
Well, because the people getting the jobs were grateful to the emperor for the appointment itself, but they were indebted to Canis for the actual negotiation. So it created this dual system of patronage. Vespasian maintained his public image of probity while ensuring the loyalty of the ambitious, wealthier classes who were more than happy to pay a premium for influence. Falco himself, with his characteristic cynicism, openly wondered about their specific financial arrangement. Was it a strict percentage, a sliding scale? Did she deduct for expenses and wear and tear? It's a perfect illustration of just how transactional power was in Flavian Rome.
And that cynicism is absolutely endemic to the man doing the dirty work here.
Mm.
Let's pivot to Falco's role in this, because his mission was directly linked to funding this political machine. He wasn't just checking math. He was tasked with securing enormous amounts of money.
Falco was part of the censor's mission, which was an exceptionally powerful position in Rome. The censors, in this case, Vespasian and his son Titus themselves, were tasked not just with assessing wealth for tax, but also with overseeing the census lists. They determined who held citizenship, who was eligible for military service, who belonged to which social rank. This gave the audit moral and political teeth far beyond, say, the modern IRS.
So Falco's goal was straightforward but grueling. Audit the wealthy and extract enormous sums from anyone fiddling their returns. The only limitation, he noted wryly, was his personal stamina.
And the financial incentive was immense. Falco secured an agreement for a percentage of the profits he uncovered. The sources imply this was substantial enough to provide him with immediate self-satisfaction, a massive private payday for all his risk.
But despite performing this crucial, highly lucrative state work, his status remained deeply precarious. And this really highlights the internal tension within the Flavian regime itself.
Exactly. The Emperor Vespasian had explicitly promised Falco social advancement. He recognized his effectiveness by offering promotion to the middle rank, the equestrian order. Yet that promise was blocked by Domitian Caesar, the emperor's younger son, who viewed informers like Falco as sordid characters, beneath the dignity of the Roman elite.
It's the classic paradox of the necessary evil.
It is. Falco himself noted that he was far less sordid than some of the musty gargoyles with clammy ethics who people the upper rank lists. It's a job where you have to wallow in corruption to expose it, and society despises you for doing so.
And the audit methodology itself reflects this cynical attitude. It wasn't just a dusty review of papers. It was designed as a proactive lifestyle check.
Right. The whole aim was to spot assets that were blatantly incongruous with declared income. This meant Falco and his new partner, Anacrites, were literally stalking the rich, looking for conspicuous consumption that just couldn't be justified by their declared taxes.
So what was the #1 red flag for undeclared wealth in Rome? That famous status symbol, property on the Bay of Neapolis.
Absolutely. Owning a premium villa at Sorrentum, for example, with those sparkling views across the bay to the island of Capria, that was the definitive mark of millionaires. Or successful ex-imperial slaves from the Petitions Bureau who had gotten rich on bribes. Or, yes, successful blackmailers. When they started looking at the Laniste, they saw Calliope had declared a Sorrentum villa, yet at the same time, he was claiming his business was running at a loss.
That's the smoking gun right there, an immediate sign of fraud.
A huge one. But they weren't just looking at title deeds.
What were the other telltale signs? The things that people living above their declared station would have?
They looked for things that couldn't be easily hidden. Large gambling stakes, for one. The clothes-flash tunics, which might seem trivial, but expensive dyed cloth signaled serious wealth. They also looked at transport. Big carriages, but particularly expensive wheels. Falco specifically noted looking for chariots with go-faster spokes and gilt finials.
Gilt finials. I love that. Spending enormous sums on, vehicular customization?
Pretty much. And of course, the truly private indulgences. They looked for evidence of large-scale aesthetic purchases. Pentelic marble nudes, implying expensive art commissions, and, naturally, the mistresses. Falco surmised that a lanista would often keep a mistress in a discreet penthouse in a less reputable area, like Saffron Street.
And the key, as Falco deduced, was that even if the mistress only spoke a couple of languages, not the 5 languages required to judge a sapphire, she would likely have wheedled out of her foolish lover an apartment to keep mother in, with the lanista's name on the deed. It's about leveraging human weakness to expose tax fraud.
And this emphasis on lifestyle is crucial because it shows that the audit was designed to shake down the most arrogant members of society, those who enjoyed their conspicuous consumption without paying their fair share to Vespasian's state. And nobody was enjoying conspicuous consumption more or operating with less transparency than the men who controlled the supply chain of blood sports.
Okay, so the moment Falco focuses his audit on the arena world, specifically on the Leonidas, the danger profile goes up exponentially. These men were powerful, ruthless, and highly capitalized. They procured the men, the gladiators, and the beasts for the Venatio.
And our investigation quickly centers on a specific geopolitical hotspot, Tripolitania in North Africa. And this isn't just a business rivalry, it's basically an international trade war between three cities.
So let's introduce the main players. We have this core rivalry between Calliopas and Saturninus. Calliopas from the city of Oia, he's the smooth operator, right?
Yes, he's tall, thin, neat, with decorous manners, and he speaks in colloquial Latin. He manages to blend in with the Roman elite. He mainly handled bestiari, the fighters of wild beasts.
He sounds like the kind of successful, slick immigrant that Rome secretly envies and publicly despises. And he presented himself as financially responsible, claiming his business was running at a loss, despite that premium Sorrentum villa.
Exactly. His entire veneer was pure deception. Falco confirmed he was using a fictional brother's name to hide substantial assets, including an enormous menagerie back in his home city of Oea. His whole operational model was built on lying about his profits to the imperial tax authority.
Now you contrast him with his great rival Saturninus from Lepsis Magna, and he is completely different.
Completely. Saturninus looks every inch of the part. He's older, solid, middle-aged, and most importantly, he was an ex-gladiator himself. This gives him a different kind of street credibility and toughness. He's this fascinating mix of ambition and cynicism.
And his provincial origin played a key role here, didn't it?
Yes. As a provincial, he was debarred from high-level political life in Rome, so he used the vile profession of arena promoter to achieve real status and wealth, a status barred to him through the traditional senatorial routes. He was fiercely proud of having fought his way up from the sand.
Now, this rivalry between Oea, that's Calliopas, and Lepsis Magna, Saturninus, isn't just about personalities. We soon learn that there is a third man, Hanno, from Dispartha, who completes this triad.
And Hanno emerges as the major player in the beast importation business. His presence confirms a long-standing, brutal Tripolitanian feud among the three main coastal cities, Oea, Lepsis, and Sabratha. The stakes for dominance in this region were already massive, and the Colosseum contracts were about to make that regional rivalry just explode into violence in Rome.
Let's delve into why these guys were so rich. It all comes down to the economics of the Venatio, the wild beast hunt spectacles. This was an unbelievably high-overhead, high-risk business.
It was incredibly resource-intensive. The primary beasts, lions and leopards, came almost exclusively from North Africa. Tigers, coming all the way from Asia, were so rare and so expensive they were reserved only for the absolute highest imperial shows.
What were the practical difficulties of sourcing these animals? It's not like they could just, order them through Amazon Prime.
No. The logistics were brutal. Firstly, you had to catch them alive, which is dodgy enough, as the source says. That often involved luring them using live bait like a poor kid, or less valuably, a goat, and forcing them into a deep pit. Then came the most dangerous part. Extracting them from the pit without damaging the animal while they were roaring and fighting, and then loading them into transport cages for a long sea voyage back to Italy.
And if they wanted cubs, which I imagine were highly valuable because you could rear them to your own specifications, the risk must have escalated even further.
Absolutely. You had to hunt and kill the mother first, or risk a severe mauling. Then you had to rear the cubs to a useful size, which meant months, if not years, of expensive feeding, veterinary care, and handling. All while absorbing the loss if the cub died or became too tame or too aggressive. The overheads were astronomical. Food, specialized handlers, ships, security, and the simple loss rate of animals that just didn't survive the voyage.
So, while the Leonidas were paid handsomely for supplying men and beasts for the Venatio, plus a share of the prize money, they constantly complained about these heavy overheads. But Falco's audit showed that even with those costs, the profit margins were astronomical. I mean, Calliopas's hidden wealth proved that.
The enormous demand was the fundamental economic driver. The Roman public demanded blood spectacle, and the emperors, needing to maintain popularity, happily provided it. This system ensured immense wealth flowed to the few men capable of managing this dangerous supply chain.
And this demand was about to go utterly stratospheric with the construction of the Flavian Amphitheater, the Colosseum. It truly is the elephant in the room, or, as you suggested, the thousands of big cats needed to fill it.
The sources confirm that the upcoming opening of the amphitheater was the central driving force behind the heightened rivalry among these Tripolitanian exporters. The inaugural shows were anticipated to be unprecedentedly lavish, requiring a venatio that would consume potentially thousands of big cats over several days.
So this meant fierce, unrestrained competition. Importers like Calliope, Saturninus, and Hanno were desperate to secure the highly lucrative imperial contracts. The phrase used in the source is that they all wanted to make a killing.
And when you have that much money and political capital riding on a single event, the environment just becomes toxic. The stakes were so high dominance over the global beast market for decades that trouble was not just anticipated, it was bound to turn nasty. It was bound to escalate quickly from tax fraud to murder.
And that volatile environment is exactly what attracted the censor's audit. Vespasian wasn't just looking for tax cheats. He was looking to capture the capital generated by this massive, state-sponsored spectacle of death before the arena bosses could hide it all away. And the first sign that this audit had crossed the line from a financial check to a murder investigation arrived at Calliopus's barracks.
The investigation shifts dramatically with the discovery of the first victim, Leonidas. And crucially, this was not a person. It was a highly valuable beast, a male lion.
But this wasn't just any lion. He was a trained man-eater, described as a state employee because he was specifically used to execute convicted criminals, like the repulsive sexual killer Thurius who's mentioned. His training made him incredibly valuable, but also unique.
And Leonidas turned out to be an expensive mistake for Calliope. Calliope had bought him as a new import, perhaps sight unseen or mislabeled. When he got him back to Rome, he found the lion was useless for the hunts, the standard venatio, because he was trained to attack men on command, not flee from gladiators or chase other animals. Calliope was furious about the bad deal, though he kept Leonidas starved to make sure he worked efficiently as an executioner.
And one morning, Leonidas is found dead in his cage with a spear wound. Calliope immediately tried to wave it off, didn't he? Claiming a stray spear from the training grounds, perhaps. But Falco, he knew better right away. What were the forensic details that signaled a cover-up?
Falco, the seasoned investigator, he immediately went to work. He confirmed the intention to cover up the death by observing several key elements. First, the cage door was suspiciously left open. Second, the ground outside the cage, which should have shown tracks of the lion's removal or transport, had been deliberately swept clean.
But the real clincher was the weapon itself.
Yes, the spearhead. Falco noted it had a longer, narrower head than standard training gear. It was clearly forged by a different smith or armorer than Calliopus's usual supplier. This indicated that the spear was not a random accident from the barracks. It was foreign, brought in specifically for the kill. This was a professional hit on a state asset.
And the most important discovery was that Leonidas wasn't even killed in his cage.
Right. The evidence showed Leonidas had been removed using a traveling cage on wheels. This proved he'd been taken out for an illicit night excursion, killed elsewhere, and then secretly returned to his billet to fake innocence. This suggested a complex, organized plot requiring bribery and stealth, involving moving a dangerous, roaring animal without the bulk of the barracks staff knowing about it.
Okay, here's where we move from a simple asset murder to massive political corruption. Leonidas's death was a side effect of a terrible, illegal, private show. Saturninus, Calliopus's rival, had initially provided a fake alibi for his gladiator, Rumex, claiming they were dining with ex-praetor Pomponius Utica that night. Tell us the truth that Falco eventually uncovered.
The real scene took place at Utica's villa. Now, Pomponius Utica was a high-level political figure and incredibly important to the Lanista because he was touted to organize the opening of the Flavian Amphitheater. Saturninus was desperate to leverage his relationship with Utica for those contracts.
And Utica, apparently not satisfied with the public games, commissioned a private secret display for his wild girlfriend, Scylla.
This was highly illegal and exceptionally dangerous, not just physically, but politically. The public games were a symbol of imperial power and propaganda. They were the emperor's gift to the people. A private bout, especially involving high-level political figures, was seen as shocking and potentially treasonous. It suggested that private citizens might be able to buy their own gladiators and stage their own spectacles, undermining the emperor's monopoly on power and violence.
So Utica wanted a big cat for the private show. He demanded a lion. not just a leopardess.
And Saturninus, aiming to please his potential patron, arranged to borrow a cat from Calliopas. He thought he was getting Draco, Calliopas's valuable Libyan lion. But Calliopas, tipped off by his keeper Buxus, who had been bribed by Saturninus to facilitate the theft, he saw an opportunity for devastating revenge.
So Calliopas, instead of giving up his prized Libyan lion, switched the animals. He sent the high-value but trained executioner Leonidas instead. He knew exactly what he was doing.
It was malicious sabotage. It was designed to ruin Saturninus's relationship with Utica, perhaps even hoping the lion would kill Saturninus's gladiator. The stage was just set for pure chaos at Utica's villa.
And Utica, overcome with reckless excitement, as the sources describe, waved a straw dummy, probably used for training, to excite the beast. But Leonidas, trained specifically to attack men on command, recognized the human movement and just immediately flew at Utica, mauling him severely.
Rumex, Saturninus's gladiator, was forced to act under immediate duress. He grabbed a spear, that non-standard mismatched spear Falco found, and he killed Leonidas, saving Utica's life, though Utica was terribly injured.
So the result of this disastrous illegal private combat was twofold. First, Utica's reputation was saved by Saturninus' swift cover-up, meaning Saturninus gained a powerful, politically indebted patron. Second, Calliopas lost a state asset, but he achieved his sabotage goal. He caused his rival serious problems while costing him nothing in the way of useful hunting beasts.
And this single incident perfectly encapsulates the entanglement of power and vice at the heart of the gladiatorial empire. A tax audit revealed sabotage, illegal private spectacles, and the trading of political favors. All of it fueled by the relentless pursuit of Colosseum contracts. And all of this leads directly to the next phase: human murder.
The immediate fallout from the Leonidas incident was the murder of the man who saved the politician, Rumex, Saturninus' gladiator. He was found dead in his quarters, stabbed with a small, dainty blade, definitely not the heavy gladius of a trained fighter.
Saturninus, in a familiar pattern, immediately covered up the death. He claimed Rumex died in his sleep and locked up the body, but suspicion instantly fell on him, fueled by his rival.
Of course. Calliopas wasted no time suggesting Saturninus had killed Rumex out of sexual jealousy. Rumex had been having an affair with Saturninus' wife Euphrasia, which seems plausible on the surface.
It is plausible, but Euphrasia, a wonderfully cynical character in her own right, was quick to push back against this narrative. She admitted she viewed sleeping with her husband's men as a perk of her position, suggesting Saturninus tolerated it. More practically, she argued that Saturninus was an ex-fighter. If he wanted Rumex dead, he would have done it cleanly and publicly, in a paid, sanctioned fight in the arena, not with a sneaky little knife in the barracks.
And Falco and Anacrites uncovered a second, more personal layer of betrayal involving Calliopas' side.
Yes. Calliopas's young, beautiful, and desperately subdued wife Artemisia was also likely having an affair with Rumex. Calliopas was described as desperately jealous and possibly abusive, keeping her heavily veiled and quiet. This raises the distinct possibility that Calliopas may have hired a killer to punish both Rumex and his own wife, a crime of passion overlaid onto the intense professional rivalry.
So we have two strong motives, rivalry and sexual jealousy, on both sides of the feud. But the body count is accelerating, and the original incident has another victim. Pomponius Utica, the ex-praetor, died painfully from his lion-inflicted wounds months later. This brought a new, powerful engine of revenge into the game: his mistress, Scylla.
Scylla, whom Utica had intended to marry, was absolutely relentless. She tracked Falco down across the Mediterranean all the way to Cyrene, and she wasn't just grieving, she wanted action.
What exactly did she want from Falco, the imperial informer?
She demanded his help to pursue a massive civil lawsuit against Calliopas and Saturninus for negligence. She sought substantial financial recompense, but far more importantly, pure vengeance. Scylla was a dangerous woman. She admitted candidly that she would kill a man in the right circumstances.
And she didn't pursue this alone. She immediately sought the help of the third Tripolitanian player, Hanno of Sabratha, to pressure the rivals. This is the moment the Tri-City War goes fully operational.
This is the deep game. Hanno, the major beast importer who had been patiently watching Calliopas and Saturninus tear each other apart over the Colosseum contracts, had already laid the groundwork for their destruction. He had systematically infiltrated Calliopas's barracks.
And how did he do that?
With his nephew, Itobal, who posed as a gladiator bought out by a rich aunt. This rich aunt was Mura, Hanno's sister. Itobal's mission was classic industrial sabotage, making men drunk before fights, creating administrative confusion. He even let out Saturnus's leopardess at one point to cause maximum damage and escalate the feud.
So Hanno's strategy was simple. weaken Calliopas and Saturninus through internal sabotage, drive them into open conflict, and then step in, clean up the wreckage, and secure the massive Flavian amphitheater contracts for himself.
Exactly. It was a cold, calculated, long-term business strategy that just happened to rely entirely on chaos and violence.
Let me just pause here because the true motive for Rumex's murder is extraordinarily complex, tying together all three Tripolitanian cities. You mentioned that Mira, Hanno's sister, and Idibal's rich aunt, was the one who engineered the line switch in the first place, sending the trained Leonidas to Erdica's villa. Why?
Because Mira personally hated Rumex for deep, complex, personal and business reasons. She had intended for Rumex to be killed by the lion at Erdica's villa. When that plan failed, and Rumex was instead hailed as a hero for saving Erdica, he became a major liability who knew too much about the illegal dealings, the sabotage, and her personal vendetta.
So Mira ordered the first successful murder.
Yes. She then used her trusted slave and interpreter, Fidelis, to stab Rumex using that small, delicate blade. Fidelis, the killer, was then himself a liability because he knew Mira had ordered the crime and knew the entire chain of events.
Wait, so Hanno's sister ordered the murder of Saturninus's gladiator, and now she has to silence the very slave she used to commit the crime, all while her brother Hanno is trying to clean up the business contracts. This is a family feud of monumental proportions.
It is a perfect microcosm of imperial corruption. Business, family vendetta, and state-level contracts all mixed up with betrayal and murder.
This all culminates violently at the Lepsis Magna Games. Vespasian's envoy, Rutilius Gallicus, who was already on site to adjudicate a land dispute between Oea and Lepsis, was forced to preside over the spectacle. The atmosphere must have been incredibly tense.
It was explosive. And the game started with a truly shocking warm-up act. The execution ad bestias of Falco's own brother-in-law, Famia.
Famia? What was his crime?
Famia was a local man who made a fatal mistake. He was convicted of the capital crime of blaspheming the gods and, even more dangerously in that locality, insulting Hannibal in his home province. Rutilius Gallicus, the emperor's representative, felt he had absolutely no choice but to carry out the sentence swiftly to prevent a massive civil riot fueled by local outrage. It's a devastating personal cost to Falco for being in the wrong place at the wrong time.
Then came the core event, the special mystery bout, ostensibly arranged by Scylla to settle her lawsuit. Hanno stepped forward, bringing in Fidelis, the slave who killed Rumex.
Hanno's motive was purely pragmatic. Silence the killer, Fidelis, by forcing him into the arena for execution as a Arius. But Fidelis knew he was doomed. In one last, desperate, vengeful act, he managed to stab and fatally wound Mira, Hanno's sister and his former mistress, before he himself was led out and killed by the beasts, finally completing that horrific chain of revenge.
The violence just reached its fever pitch. Calliopas was then forced into the arena and killed. And then, in a truly terrifying turn of events, the final fighter brought in by Calliopas' side, labeled simply Romanus, was revealed to be Falco's partner, Anacrites.
Anacrites, the reserved palace scrutineer, had been captured by Calliopas after trying to solve the case on his own, and was now forced to fight to the death against Saturninus. The financial audit had literally dragged the auditor into the sand of the arena. This is the ultimate example of the stakes involved.
That moment, Anacrites, the meticulous civil servant, suddenly forced to take up the sword against former gladiator like Saturninus, is just an unbelievable climax. What was the immediate outcome of this horrific showdown? Who survived and who emerged victorious in the long term?
The outcome was both messy and politically decisive. Calliopas was dead after the fight. Saturninus was forced to fight Anacrites, but as the experienced gladiator, he survived, albeit wounded. And Hanno, despite the very public death of his sister and the exposure of his sabotage secrets to Falco, was left standing as the dominant beast importer. His two main rivals had neutralized each other.
And Scylla's vengeance. Her lawsuit, seeking financial recompense and retribution, was settled pretty dramatically by Calliopas' death in the arena. Her agent, Anacrites, helped lure Calliopas to Leptis, where the final reckoning took place.
The official legal outcome was typical of Rome, ambiguous. The original deaths of Leonidas and Rumex officially remain unsolved by the visuals, the local police who just lacked the jurisdiction or competence to handle such a complex international conspiracy. But the truth had been exposed. The violence was a fatal mix of business rivalry, sexual jealousy, and high-level corruption driven entirely by the promise of the Colosseum contracts.
Now, despite being dragged into this horrifying mess, Falco was able to successfully pivot this investigation back into effective governance. He witnessed firsthand the systemic issues in the gladiatorial industry that allowed these deadly rivalries to flourish unchecked.
And this resulted in concrete, highly sophisticated policy recommendations. Falco, via his partner Helena Justina, submitted these official proposals to Rutilius Gallicus, Vespasian's envoy. Falco realized that the corruption stemmed from unregulated private enterprise.
What were the specific suggestions he proposed to curb this kind of murderous competition?
The first and most important recommendation was for the state to take direct control over gladiatorial training and beast imports. This would break the power of the Calliopuses and Saturninuses by making the supply chain a state monopoly, thereby stabilizing the market and removing the financial incentive for private murder and sabotage. He specifically suggested employing imperial agents, perhaps even cynical but capable men like Anacrites, to supervise this new process.
That would have been a massive administrative undertaking, but necessary to ensure the emperor maintained his monopoly on spectacle. He also offered political recommendations, didn't he?
Yes, recognizing the geopolitical nature of the feud in Tripolitania. To stabilize the African provinces and secure loyalty, Falco suggested admitting prominent African chiefs to the Senate. He knew Vespasian favored cheap measures that promoted loyalty and integration, and bringing these wealthy provincial elites into the Roman political fold would dilute their dangerous private power. This shows Falco was thinking about comprehensive administrative reform, not just his fee.
And speaking of fees, after all that risk, all the loss, was the imperial reward delivered?
It was. Upon returning to Rome, Falco received a letter from Vespasian. His fee for the census audit had been re-examined, and he was paid the full requested percentage of the wealth he uncovered. He was now officially a substantial citizen, a man of genuine documented wealth, though still viewed suspiciously by the likes of Domitian. The emperor recognized the high-stakes work, confirming that even the most sordid, dangerous imperial tasks yield substantial rewards.
So professional success was achieved, the imperial treasury benefited, and policy was potentially improved. But as you pointed out, this victory came at a terrible personal cost.
An utterly devastating cost. Falco lost his brother-in-law, Femia, executed ad bestias for an ill-advised insult, and he nearly lost his trusted partner, Anacrites, who was forced to fight Saturninus in the arena. Falco's life was enriched, but his family was diminished, and his partner irrevocably changed by the violence he faced.
And we can't forget the absurd side mission Falco undertook while he was in the region. While tracking criminals and tax cheats across Tripolitania, Falco and Helena's brother, Justinus, were attempting to track down the legendary priceless herb silphium in Cyrenaica. They were hoping for a world monopoly fortune, a substance so valuable it was famously worth its weight in silver.
A mission, the sources confirmed, that failed utterly. After all the travel, all the dangerous searching, the final few known remaining plants of the silphium had been grazed out by a lone goat. It's a fantastic piece of sardonic detail. Great fortunes are made on the backs of murder and political fixing, but true, natural wealth disappears due to a simple goat. Not every deep dive ends in triumph. But the core mission, exposing the rotten heart of the gladiatorial empire, succeeded violently.
So to wrap this up, what have we really learned?
This deep dive into Rome's gladiatorial empire reveals that the censor's tax audit was never truly about simple theft. It was about exposing a system of state patronage and private enterprise so fundamentally rotten that premeditated murder was integral to securing essential state contracts. The cost of spectacle, the promise of the glorious Colosseum opening, was paid for in blood, whether that blood belonged to a high-value trained lion, a slave, a provincial official, or even an imperial relative like Famia.
It is a stunning look at how, when you start pulling on the thread of financial corruption, you quickly unravel the entire social fabric, from the poorest, most expendable gladiator up to the highest ex-praetor. But here is the provocative final thought we want to leave you with, especially when considering the ultimate fate of Anacrites.
The greatest danger in uncovering deep corruption isn't necessarily the villains themselves. It's the temptation, or perhaps the necessity, to become exactly what you despise just to achieve your goal.
Anacrites was a reserved, meticulous scrutineer, a palace spy, a man of ledgers. But he became so desperate to be effective, to solve the case and prove his worth to Falco and the state, that he got himself captured and became a Romanus, fighting to the death in the arena he was supposed to be auditing.
When you are exposed to darkness and deception, when you are forced to deal with criminals who operate outside the law, how do you manage to keep your hands clean? Or does the quest for justice inevitably force you to descend into the arena, picking up a sword and fighting on terms dictated by the criminals you are supposed to be investigating? Is the line between investigator and mercenary always defined by who signs your paycheck?
Something to consider as you step back into your own world. Thank you for joining us for the deep dive.
We'll see you next time.